Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we share powerful tales that touch the heart and inspire the soul. Today's story is one of love, sacrifice, and the profound bond between a woman and her dog. It's a journey of unexpected twists and life lessons that remind us what truly matters. So, sit back, relax, and let's dive into this emotional journey together. Emily Johnson stood before the full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom, her heart beating with an almost surreal rhythm. The ivory wedding dress she had envisioned since childhood was now a reality, hugging her figure perfectly, the delicate lace detail catching the soft morning light streaming through the window. Her auburn hair cascaded in loose waves beneath her veil, framing her face in a way that felt almost too perfect to be true. She had spent 18 months planning every little detail, every moment, every step, and now it was finally here, her wedding day. But as she admired herself in the mirror, there was an unease that lingered beneath the surface, an unsettling tug at her heart that she couldn't quite shake. Her beloved dog, Buddy, lay quietly at her feet. The German Shepherd, now 13 years old, had been by her side through thick and thin, through her high school days, through college, and now into her adult life. He was more than just a pet. He was a constant companion, her protector, her confidant. She had rescued him from the local shelter when he was a scrappy 8-month-old pup. And in return, he had rescued her in more ways than she could count. She looked down at Buddy, who watched her every movement with an intensity that felt different from his usual protective gaze. He was still, almost too still, and Emily couldn't help but notice how his eyes, once full of excitement and energy, seemed tired, weary even. His fur, though still thick and glossy, had begun to lose its luster in recent months, and his movements had slowed with age. But today, of all days, something felt off. He wasn't bouncing around with excitement at the sight of her in her wedding dress. He wasn't wagging his tail or offering the usual enthusiastic bark when she spoke his name. "Well, what do you think, Buddy?" Emily asked softly, her voice tinged with a mixture of amusement and anxiety as she turned slightly, admiring the way the lace detail of the dress caught the light. But Buddy didn't respond. His ears twitched at the mention of her fiancé's name, Mark, but he remained seated, his head resting on his paws. He simply watched her, as if deep in thought, as though there was something important he needed to tell her, but didn't know how. "Is Mark a keeper?" she asked with a chuckle, half expecting the usual playful nudge from Buddy. Instead, she received only a silence that made her stomach knot with worry. At that moment, Emily's mother, Elizabeth, popped her head into the room, her voice a familiar and comforting presence in the whirlwind of emotions. "Sweetheart, the makeup artist is here. Are you ready?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with the excitement of the day. Emily gave herself one last look in the mirror, taking in the vision before her. It was everything she had ever imagined, elegant, graceful, and perfect. Yet, a part of her heart felt heavy as she knelt down to scratch behind Buddy's ears. "Come on, boy, let's go make me a bride," she coaxed, hoping that Buddy would respond with his usual warmth. Buddy stood slowly, his joints creaking slightly with age. Emily's heart sank as she noticed the effort it took for him to rise, and the way his back legs trembled as he steadied himself. She gently reached down to help him, but he didn't seem to need it. He moved with determination, as if he was doing this for her, for the wedding. But there was something about the way he moved that made her pause. He was never like this. As the excitement of the day ramped up around her, Emily found herself increasingly distracted by the changes in Buddy. She had noticed it over the past few days. He wasn't eating as much. He was moving slower, and he spent more time resting than he used to. She had meant to take him to the vet, but the demands of wedding preparations had kept her too busy. There was always something to do, always something to prepare, and Buddy, her loyal friend, had patiently waited by her side, offering no complaints. "Is he okay?" Emily's maid of honor, Jenny, asked as she joined her in the room, concern written on her face as she noticed Buddy's subdued behavior. "He seems a little off today." Emily frowned, reaching down to run her hand along Buddy's back. I think he's just picking up on all the excitement, she said, trying to reassure herself more than anyone else. You know how sensitive he can be. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. Something wasn't right with Buddy, and she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. They were running behind schedule when Emily's mother, still trying to maintain the day's perfect flow, called out that it was time to go. The photographer was waiting, and traffic might be heavy. We should get going, Elizabeth urged. Let's go get those pictures done. Emily nodded, trying to shake the unease that had settled in her chest. Come on, Max, time to go, she said, calling Buddy by his full name, as she always did when she wanted his attention. But Buddy didn't immediately respond. He hesitated, then slowly walked to the door, his steps heavy and slow. As they drove to the church, Emily couldn't shake the knot in her stomach. It wasn't wedding jitters. She knew she was making the right decision with Mark. He was the love of her life. But the worry about Buddy gnawed at her, making it hard to focus on anything else. Buddy, normally well-behaved during car rides, had been unusually clingy, resting his head on her lap the entire drive. He was acting out of character, and it was starting to worry her more than she was willing to admit. They arrived at St. Patrick's Church, a beautiful, historic building with soaring stained glass windows and an atmosphere of timeless elegance. The photographer was already in the church garden, capturing the last bit of golden sunlight before the ceremony. The day felt perfect until Buddy decided to block her path in the church garden. In the midst of the photo session, Buddy stood between Emily and the photographer, blocking her way. He wasn't growling or showing aggression. He was simply standing there, pressing his body against her legs with a look in his eyes that said, I need you. Don't leave me. At first, Emily tried to gently move him aside, but Buddy wouldn't budge. She called his name, but he didn't respond. He only pressed closer to her, his body warm against hers in a way that made her heart skip a beat. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. Max, come here. Emily's father called, trying to coax the dog away. But Buddy stayed put. As Emily knelt down to check on him, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Buddy's breathing was labored, his body trembling with the weight of something deeper than just the excitement of the day. Something's wrong, she whispered, her voice breaking. Tears welled up in her eyes as she gently cradled Buddy's head, realizing that the day she had planned for so long was being overshadowed by the one thing that truly mattered, her best friend, her companion, the one who had been by her side through every chapter of her life, was in distress, and she had to act quickly. That was the moment when Emily understood. No matter how many plans she had made, no matter how perfect her wedding was supposed to be, Buddy needed her now, more than ever. As Emily knelt down beside Buddy, her heart was pounding in her chest. The world around her, the photographer, the wedding guests, the day she had spent over a year meticulously planning, faded into the background. All that mattered now was the dog who had been her constant companion through so many chapters of her life. He wasn't just a pet. He was family. Something's wrong, Emily whispered again, her voice trembling. Buddy's warm body pressed against her legs. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that spoke volumes. A silent plea for help. His once bright amber eyes now seemed clouded with something she couldn't quite place, an urgency that set her heart racing. Emily's mother, Elizabeth, stood behind her, her brow furrowed with concern. Sweetheart, we need to get these photos done. The guests will be arriving soon, she said, her voice carrying the impatience of someone trying to keep things moving forward. We've been planning this day for months. But Emily barely heard her. She was too focused on Buddy, whose heavy breathing and trembling legs sent a sharp pang of fear through her. The thought of continuing with the wedding while Buddy was clearly suffering felt impossible. She had always promised herself she would never let anything come before him. And today, of all days, she couldn't abandon him. He had been there for her through everything. And now, he needed her more than ever. Mom, I can't, Emily said softly, her voice cracking as she looked up at her mother. I can't leave him like this. Elizabeth, who had always been the voice of reason, paused as she took in the scene. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, Emily saw the vulnerability in her eyes. Her mother's face softened, understanding now that her daughter was faced with an impossible choice. Without another word, Elizabeth turned toward the rest of the wedding party. "We'll handle the rest. You go with Buddy," she said, her tone firm but filled with a quiet strength. With Jenny's help, Emily hurriedly gathered her skirts, her heart hammering in her chest. Buddy, despite his distress, slowly followed her, his head resting against her legs, as though he knew she was his anchor in this moment of uncertainty. As they made their way to the car, Emily's mind raced. She had meant to take him to the vet for a checkup, but wedding preparations had taken over her life in the past few days. Now, it seemed like too little, too late. The drive to the veterinary clinic was quiet, save for the soft hum of the car engine and the occasional sigh from Buddy. He rested his head in Emily's lap, his breathing shallow but steady, though it was clear he wasn't doing well. She gently stroked his fur, whispering reassurances that she wasn't sure she even believed herself. "It's okay, Buddy. We're almost there. Just hang on a little longer." Her hands were shaking as she dialed Dr. Peterson's emergency line, her fingers pressing the phone to her ear with urgency. "Please, I need help. Something's wrong with Buddy. He's having trouble breathing, and he's acting strange." Emily's voice was barely a whisper, her heart heavy with the weight of her words. "Please, I need you to help him." A long pause followed as the voice on the other end of the line acknowledged the emergency. "I'm here. Bring him in right away," the voice said, calm but firm. "We'll be ready for him as soon as you arrive." When they arrived at the clinic, Dr. Peterson was already waiting at the door. Emily's wedding dress, now creased and dirty from the frantic rush, was a stark contrast to the sterile, clinical atmosphere of the vet's office. Dr. Peterson's eyes widened slightly when he saw her, but he said nothing. Instead, he immediately took charge, guiding them inside and offering no judgment, only focused concern for Buddy. The examination room felt cold, but Emily couldn't tear her eyes away from Buddy, who was now lying on the floor, his breathing labored, his body weakened by whatever was wrong. Dr. Peterson worked quickly, checking his vitals and running some initial tests. Emily paced the room, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts, each one worse than the last. What was happening to Buddy? Was this it? Was she losing him? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Peterson returned, his face grave. "Please, sit down," he said gently, motioning for Emily to take a seat. Jenny, who had been sitting quietly, joined her side. "It's not good news," Dr. Peterson continued, his voice soft but steady. "Buddy has developed a cardiac condition. From the tests we've run, it looks like he's in the early stages of heart failure." Emily's stomach dropped. Heart failure. She couldn't believe the words she was hearing. This wasn't possible. Buddy had been fine just a few days ago. He had been lively, playful, like the dog she had always known. But now, the reality of the situation hit her hard. "Is there anything we can do?" Emily asked, her voice breaking as she fought to keep the tears at bay. "Can we save him? We can start him on medication right away." Dr. Peterson replied, "It won't cure the condition, but it can help manage the symptoms and make him more comfortable. But I have to be honest with you. Given his age and the severity of the condition, we're likely looking at months, rather than years." The room felt like it was closing in on her as the weight of the doctor's words sunk in. Buddy, the dog who had been there for every major moment in her life, would soon be gone. Emily felt the tears that she had been holding back finally spill over. She had always known that one day she would have to say goodbye to him, but now that the moment was approaching, she didn't feel ready. Not at all. Jenny squeezed her hand tightly, trying to offer comfort, but Emily could barely breathe as the reality of it all sank in. Buddy wasn't going to be there for her wedding. He wasn't going to be there to see her start her new life with Mark. The thought was unbearable. As the tears flowed freely, Emily turned to Dr. Peterson, her voice soft but determined. "I need to stay with him. He's been by my side for so long. I can't just leave him now." Dr. Peterson nodded. "I understand. We'll start him on the medication now. But I want you to be prepared. His time is limited. In the next hour, the clinic became a blur of activity. Dr. Peterson administered the first round of medication, explaining the treatment plan in detail. Emily sat on the floor next to Buddy, her wedding dress spread around her like a cloud, her hands resting gently on his body. It felt like the world outside was moving on without her. But in this moment, all she cared about was Buddy, her best friend, her protector, the one who had always been there when she needed him most. And as she sat there, stroking Buddy's fur and whispering comforting words, Emily realized that it wasn't the wedding she had dreamed of, but it was the wedding she needed. In that small, sterile room, surrounded by the people who truly cared about her, Mark, her parents, Jenny, she found the real meaning of love, commitment, and sacrifice. As the door to the examination room opened, Emily looked up to see Mark standing in the doorway, his tuxedo slightly rumpled, his face full of concern. Without a word, he walked over to her, kneeling beside her on the floor, and took her hand in his. "I'm here," he whispered. "We're all here, and we're not going anywhere." Emily looked at him through tear-filled eyes, grateful for his presence, for his unwavering support. She smiled weakly, knowing that their journey, though altered, was just beginning. Together, they would face whatever came next for Buddy, for their love, and for the family they would build together. The sterile, quiet room was a stark contrast to the joyful celebration Emily had imagined just hours before. There was no grand wedding ceremony, no sea of guests in elegant attire, no sparkling reception filled with laughter and dancing. But as Emily sat on the floor beside Buddy, her wedding dress crumpled around her. Her heart felt full in a way she hadn't anticipated. It was a different kind of full, a love so deep and unconditional that it transcended any grand wedding plan. Mark, still in his tuxedo, had rushed to the clinic when he'd heard what was happening. He had told her not to worry about the wedding, the vows, the guests, the flowers, they could all wait. What mattered now was that she wasn't alone, and neither was Buddy. Mark knelt beside Emily, his warm hand gently holding hers, the soft hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights the only sound in the room. It was a world apart from the one she had imagined for today, yet it felt more real, more meaningful. "Emily, we can reschedule the wedding," Mark said, his voice low and steady. "We don't have to rush this. We can wait until Buddy's better." Emily shook her head, tears still glistening in her eyes. She had thought about it. Of course, the wedding she had planned, months of meticulous details and dreams of a perfect day, was slipping away. And she had no idea if Buddy would even be there to share it. But one thing was clear to her now. Buddy had been with her for every major moment in her life. He had been there when she had felt lost, when she had cried through heartaches, when she had taken risks and started new chapters. He wasn't just a pet. He was her family. "No, Mark," Emily said softly, her voice cracking. "I made a promise to Buddy when I adopted him. I promised I'd never leave him. And I'm not going to break that promise today. I need him to be here for this." Mark's eyes softened as he squeezed her hand, his lips curving into a faint, understanding smile. "I know, and I'm with you, every step of the way." The next few hours were a blur, the wedding ceremony forgotten as the focus shifted entirely to Buddy's care. Dr. Peterson, who had administered the first round of medication, explained the plan going forward, but there were no guarantees. He was 13, a senior dog by any standard, and the heart failure that had taken hold of his body was cruelly inevitable. The medication would help, but it couldn't turn back time. All they could do now was manage his symptoms, keep him comfortable, and make him feel loved. Sarah, Jenny, and Emily's parents kept things running back home. Emily had been in contact with them throughout the morning, her mother informing guests of the family emergency while Jenny made arrangements with the reception venue. Everyone had rallied behind her, even as the plans for the wedding shattered around them. But none of that mattered now. The real moment, Emily's real moment, was unfolding in that small, intimate room, sitting on the cold floor beside Buddy. And then, as Emily sat there in her wrinkled wedding dress, makeup streaked with tears, something unexpected happened. Mark, ever the calming force, stood up, his eyes glinting with resolve. "How about this?" he said, his voice full of warmth. "I love you, Emily, and I want to be your husband. Right here, right now." For a moment, Emily could only stare at him in shock, unable to comprehend what he was suggesting. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice small but hopeful. Mark smiled gently, his gaze shifting to Buddy, who had managed to lift his head slightly, his tail thumping weakly against the floor. "I mean, let's get married here, right now. You and me. Forget the fancy wedding, the venue, the guests. We don't need any of that. What we need is love, and we have that, right here, with Buddy." Emily blinked, overwhelmed by the tenderness of his words. In that moment, it felt like all the chaos, all the plans, all the pressure to have the perfect wedding had faded away. What Mark was offering wasn't just a simple ceremony. It was a declaration of love that meant more than any aisle walk, more than any grand celebration. It was about their bond, their life together, and honoring the one who had always been there to guide them both. In his own way, Buddy. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes again. But this time, they weren't filled with sadness. They were tears of gratitude. For Mark, for the love they shared, and for Buddy, who had quietly given them this extraordinary gift. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady now. "Yes, let's do it. Right here, right now, with Buddy." Within moments, the wheels were in motion. Jenny quickly made the call to the wedding planner, informing them of the change, while Dr. Peterson and his staff, who had been observing the small scene in the examination room, discreetly wiped away their own tears. The minister, who had agreed to come to the clinic, arrived shortly after, his face softening when he saw the love and resolve in Emily and Mark's eyes. There was no hesitation now, no fear of imperfections. There was only the recognition that this was their moment, and it was perfect in its own way. The minister spoke the words they had dreamed of saying to each other for so long. "Do you, Emily, take Mark to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love, honor, and cherish, in sickness and in health?" "I do," Emily answered, her voice strong and unwavering. "And do you, Mark, take Emily to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love, honor, and cherish, in sickness and in health?" "I do," Mark replied, his voice filled with emotion as he looked into Emily's eyes. With those words, they were married. It wasn't the wedding they had planned, but it was the wedding they needed. The ceremony was simple, intimate, just the two of them, the minister, and their beloved Buddy, who was lying at their feet, quietly watching, as though he knew that this moment was as much for him as it was for them. As they exchanged vows, the love that flowed between them was palpable, more profound than any grandiose wedding could have conveyed. This was real love, the kind that doesn't care about the perfect dress, the perfect venue, or the perfect timeline. It's the kind that endures through heartache, through uncertainty, and through the challenges life throws your way. And as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, Buddy managed to lift his head just enough to give a quiet woof of approval, his tail giving one last, gentle thump. The room was filled with laughter and tears, a mixture of joy and sorrow, and a profound sense of gratitude for the love they had all found in each other. For Emily and Mark, their wedding day would always be remembered as the day love redefined what mattered most. Not the perfect ceremony, but the perfect love. And Buddy, whose loyalty and devotion had shown them how to love without reservation, was at the heart of it all. Thank you so much for watching and experiencing this heartfelt story with us. We hope it touched your heart as deeply as it did ours. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Empathy Stories for more tales that inspire, connect, and uplift. We appreciate you being part of our community, and we look forward to bringing you more powerful stories soon.